Welcome back. Now, Police Minister Senzo Mchunu says 163 police officers were suspended for misconduct, corruption, theft and serious crimes, including murder, during the 2023-2024 financial year. Responding to questions raised by various MPs, Mchunu said 218 police officers have been dismissed for corruption-related offences in the past 5 years. Crime expert Willem Els joins us to unpack this. A very good evening to you, Willem. A very daunting and grim picture painted once again. But now, again, even more concerning when it comes to our law enforcement officials who aren't so law-abiding. What do you make of these statistics that the Minister released?
Good evening to you, Masa. Yes, indeed, it is not a very bright picture that you just painted. And before we start, we must just remind ourselves that there are numerous men and women in blue that are really putting their lives on the line every day in order to protect us, and that are not corrupt. But unfortunately, you've got your bad apples, and it seems, based on these statistics, that those apples are getting more and more. And that is a challenge, because it seems that the police in itself, the police officers, also lost their respect for the law and their respect for doing the right thing.
And speaking of those bad apples as well, you know, they're high-ranking officials and across the board as well. When you're looking at some of these officials who have been charged, from lieutenant generals to brigadiers, colonels, captains, warrant officers, a sergeant, a constable. So it really does stretch across the board. So how do you then pinpoint this problem and really nip it in the bud when it seems to have really mushroomed?
Yeah, well, you just spoke now about the backbone of the police, from the top to the bottom. And that is very concerning. But the minister, when he took power, he actually made public four areas of focus that he would like to focus on. And one of those areas was to counter corruption. And I think now is a perfect time for the minister to actually put his deed by its words and come up with a strategy that is actually going to turn this ship around. Because you need a holistic strategy that will attack these behavior by the police officers, but also there need to be consequences. You know, within the police, you've got your internal disciplinary code, your standing orders, and it seems that there's a reluctance from police officers in order to actually charge these officers. Only when there's a lot of pressure on them, it seems that these officers are being charged. So what we will need to turn around, we have to revisit that, and we have to turn around that culture within the police of impunity.
How does the minister then turn that culture around? Because there's always talk about it, and as you're saying, Willem, as well, there needs to be consequences. But what actually happens to these police officers once they are suspended or then fired? Do they disappear into the abyss, or do they go through the legal court system? And we've seen how the court system has also kind of failed when it comes to justice and holding people to account in many instances, in many cases. So to those officers as well, what is the harshest repercussion, and are we seeing that being implemented?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. You know, it depends on the type of misdemeanor or crime that's been committed. What happens in South Africa, that currently you've got just over 12% conviction or detection rate. That means that only 12% of all the crimes are successfully prosecuted where we have a positive outcome, people being fined or going to prison. And that's across the board. If you look at robberies, for instance, there you only have a 10% detection rate. So you got a 90% chance of getting away when you perpetrate a robbery. And that is a culture that is all over in South Africa, but also it seems that it is prevailing in the police as well. So we have to turn that around. And the only way we can turn around that is if we adopt a strategy against these police officers that are corrupt. There's one strategy, a crime prevention strategy, they call it the broken window strategy, and that is when you go for the smallest. And so if you don't wait for the big misdemeanors, even the smallest, and you start to prosecute, you start to act against police officers for the smallest misdemeanors, it's going to prevent the bigger ones. and that is the theory. So I think that they have to look at that. We have to look at a holistic strategy where they take all the drivers. They have to look what are the drivers within the police service that are prompting these officers to be corrupt and to be not to be law abiding. So that is the challenge that is faced by the minister. And I like the minister's his plan, where he started to bring together all the state departments, but also the multi-stakeholder engagement with the private sector and other entities that can assist. I think he has to bring all of them together, see how they can contribute, get to the bottom of why corruption is so prevalent in the police, and then they have to come up with a strategy that really take aim at that and act decisively. Because if we do not act decisively, this thing next year, the year after next year, we're going to sit here, we're going to have the same discussion.
Yeah, and instead of it being a few bad apples, the whole lot would have then been spoiled.
Exactly. But apart from the amount of police officers that are being corrupt, and as I mentioned, there are very many of them that are not. The problem that they are facing, and even those police officers that are not corrupt, is the perception from the police, from the public, that they are being corrupt. And that undermines the trust, it severely undermines the trust of the public in the police, but also it starts to affect the attitude of the police towards the public. Because if you are law-abiding, you're straight, and you are being accused of being corrupt on a daily basis, then at the end of the day, you're just going to withdraw. And that is the problem that we face out there.
And, Willem, as you're speaking about that trust that's being undermined as well, and as we're seeing this widening trust deficit as well between members of the public and the SAPS, it's very difficult as well to kind of bridge that gap when, according to those stats as well by the Minister of Police, 245 SAPS personnel's names have been submitted to the National Register of Sex Offenders. GBV and crimes against women and children are a big pandemic, a big problem. We've been talking about it. The president has declared it a national crisis. However, we've got police officers who are on the national sex offenders list. How do then the public then trust that we are getting a hold of this plight?
Yeah, that is actually unfortunate that our legislation, our regulations doesn't address that effectively. Because if ideally you would not like someone who is on that sex offenders list to even to be in public service and working with the public and protecting them. So that is a real challenge. I think we have to look at our legislation, we have to look at our regulations, our standing orders, and we have to act more decisively against these people who are they actually as wolves that are roaming around like sheep. So we have to protect our public against that.
Whose responsibility is it to ensure that we don't have people whose names are on the sex offenders list? Whose responsibility is it to make sure that there is harsh actual implication for being a corrupt police official? And who's actually dropping the ball here?
I think it starts at the top with the police service. It starts with your management, your top management, but it also goes down to your station management, and that is actually, I think, at the moment where one of our biggest challenges are. If your station commissioner or commander drops the ball, then the whole area or that they are policing is actually falling apart, and that is where it needs to be. We need to start. We need our station commissioners to act decisively. They are in possession of these lists, and they have to act on that.
Whatever happens to those officers who are then just dismissed?
Well, if they've been found guilty disciplinary, and there's a criminal case being investigated against them, that case will then, the docket must be completed, and then it must go to the NPA to decide whether they've got a prima facie case to investigate, to prosecute. So, but what we see is with the 12.5% of a detection rate that we have, so only maybe 12% of those police officers will actually end up in court if you go by the current statistics.
And one can only imagine what happens then to the rest of them and what kind of life they pursue thereafter. Willem, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and joining us this evening to talk about this very important conversation that possibly could threaten, of course, security of a national public as well. That was Willem Els, who's a crime expert, just speaking to us about the statistics that were released by the police minister regarding police officers who have been charged with corruption and other cases as well, including murder.